Thank you, and welcome to everybody out there. I think we're going to be joined during the course of this by a lot more people. As Ken indicated before, this is a variation of the talk that I gave back in June, but after that talk and after we posted all of the ZAP sites on our website where you can explore them in more depth and see a lot of the great images that we were able to find, there was a number of cleanup issues. In particular, I didn't work on City Hall as a site. And when I explored that more and more and more, it became quite evident that one of GA's main focuses was, in fact, the attempt to get a gay rights bill passed in New York. So that's largely the focus of this talk. So just to remind everybody, just a month after Stonewall, in July of 1969, the first LGBT activist organization formed was the Gay Liberation Front at Alternate U, which was at 6th Avenue and 14th Street. We just lost the building last year, which was a counterculture school. And GLF was a leftist group that attempted to ally itself with all of the other progressive movements happening in the 60s at that point, including Black Panthers, anti-Vietnam War, and so on. But just 4 months later, a number of GLF members who became disaffected by the group left and formed the Gay Activist Alliance, which I'll continually refer to as GAA, in November, December of 1969. And its sole focus was, quote, the liberation of gay people. Both GLF and GAA met at the Church of the Holy Apostles in Chelsea, as did a number of other groups, making this church essentially New York City's first LGBT community center. In May of 1971, GAA opened its own headquarters, which was the Firehouse on Worcester Street, and this served as New York's most important LGBT political and cultural community center until October of 1974, when an arsonist burned the group out of the building. During this period, GAA became the single most influential American gay liberation political activist group in the first half of the 1970s. The group's first public action was a picket in March of 1970 at City Hall. Over 30 GA members attempted to enter the building to meet with Mayor John V. Lindsay over his failure to take a public stance against police harassment and in support of ending discrimination against the gay community. The group was confronted by police on foot and on horseback and forced onto Broadway, where they picketed for 2 hours. The action at least resulted in a meeting with a representative of the mayor. Just 3 days later, on March 8th, 1970, just 8 months after Stonewall, the police raided the Snake Pit After Hours bar and detained 167 men at the local police station. In the image on the left, where the person's walking, the railing there is where the Snake Pit was, in the basement of the building. Young Argentinian immigrant Diego Vinales attempted to escape, but was impaled on a fence. And GAA and GLF quickly assembled a protest march of about 500 people that same day, which demonstrated their early strength and inspired many more people to become politically active, including a lot of people that did not get inspired by Stonewall itself. The success of the Snake Pit protest has often been cited as the inspiration for what emerged as GAA's most effective, famous, and imaginative tactic, the ZAP, which was a direct surprise public confrontation with political figures and corporate and government entities regarding gay rights and discrimination, designed to attract media attention. It's been described as, quote, a hybrid of media theater and political demonstration. And GAA member, one of the founders, Marty Robinson, is generally credited as the driving force behind GAA's ZAPS. A typical ZAP featured picketing outside while confrontations were made inside office buildings or at public events, and included leafleting, gay liberation songs, and festive elements such as taking coffee and donuts or cookies for office ZAPs. The media, specifically newspapers and television, were always present. GAA's actions were very highly focused, coordinated, targeted, and for the most part successful. It provided the next crucial stage in LGBT political action after the homophile groups of the 1950s and 60s, as represented on the left by a 1965 picket at the White House. Those actions were largely done by the Daughters of Bilitis and Mattachine Society. So GAA put an increasingly public and diverse face on the LGBT community and the discrimination it faced on all fronts. This talk will highlight again GAA's focus on discrimination and its push for a gay rights bill as one of its major goals. The first public ZAP was at the Metropolitan Museum of Art on its 100th anniversary. Mayor Lindsay was invited to participate in a morning ceremony on the Met's front steps. GAA was still furious over the snake pit raid and had been trying without success to engage the mayor on its issues, so they decided to confront him outside and inside the museum. This was the first of their two-year campaign to disrupt the mayor at every single possible public appearance he made. GAA began to strongly advocate for anti-discrimination legislation around this time. On June 2nd, 1970, City Council Minority Leader Eldon R. Clingan announced that he would introduce a bill to extend the city's Fair Employment Practices Law to prohibit discrimination based on sexual orientation or preference. In the meantime, GAA had a ZAP at the New York Republican State Committee, which protested Governor Nelson Rockefeller's so-called crime of silence about gay rights in the state. The 6 political demands of GAA were repeal of state sodomy and solicitation laws, an end to police entrapment statewide, a state fair employment law, banning discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation, an end to bonding companies' discrimination against homosexuals, an investigation of the state liquor authority, which was one of the prime forces of oppression against the gay community by revoking liquor licenses of bars that served the gay community, and an end to harassment of gay bars statewide. The ZAP here consisted of a picket line outside and a 7-hour sit-in the offices of the Republican State Committee until police arrived and made arrests. The Rockefeller Five are considered the first LGBT protesters arrested for gay rights in New York City. And I hope at some point, I don't know if he's here yet, but Phil Rea, who's the second from the right, should be joining us today, I hope. In September of 1970, Harper's Magazine featured on its cover a long, blatantly homophobic essay titled Homo Hetero, The Struggle for Sexual Identity, which presented homosexuality as a mental illness. Around 50 GAA members had an all-day sit-in the editor's offices. This ZAP had a positive effect in a number of ways. Number one, it received much television coverage. And secondly, Merle Miller, a former editor at Harper's, who was so appalled by the article that he came out publicly and wrote his own long article, quote, What It Means to Be a Homosexual, in the New York Times Sunday Magazine in January of 1971, which is now considered a landmark of American journalism. He said, quote, "I'm sick and tired of reading and hearing such goddamn demeaning, degrading bullshit about me and my friends." The bill that Councilman Clingan had announced that he was going to introduce was actually broadened by the time it was introduced in January of 1971 to also include discrimination in housing, public accommodation, or employment based on sexual orientation under the New York City human rights law. He was joined by Councilman Carter-Burden, and the two of them make an interesting contrast. Carter-Burden was a noted socialite of his day, and Mr. Clingan looks a little on the disheveled side. They ultimately were joined by Councilman Leonard Sholnick and Ted Weiss, and the bill became known as Intro 475, or the Clingan-Burden bill, as it was mostly called. When this was introduced before the New York City Council, it was announced as the first of its kind in the United States. And again, passage of Intro 475 became one of the major goals of GAA, but it became stalled without a committee assignment in the council under the homophobic Democratic Majority Leader Thomas J. Cute. Fidelifax of New York was a private investigation agency accused of gathering information on the sex lives of individuals, particularly LGBT people and those thought to be, and they sold it to prospective employers. The founder, a former FBI agent, when asked how he could identify gay people, replied, quote, "If one looks like a duck, walks like a duck, associates only with ducks, and quacks like a duck, he is probably a duck." GAA members managed to get inside the offices and attempted to pay for an investigation of the firm's head. When the police threatened arrest, they joined their colleagues on the picket line outside, making shrill sounds with small squeezable rubber ducks. The most notable GAA member obviously was Marty Robinson on the left, who dressed up in a duck outfit. In a very bizarre coincidence, the movie Shaft was being filmed in Times Square that day, and the opening sequence of the movie features actor Richard Roundtree winding his way through the activists, providing a rare live color document of a GAA action. And if you'll note, I'll put my cursor up here, that's Marty Robinson, shows up in the movie in his duck outfit. So I'm gonna stop sharing and we're gonna show that clip.
On timepiece, brother. Goodbye.
To support Intro 475, GAA formed a Fair Employment Committee, which conducted research on job discrimination in New York City and found that discrimination against LGBT teachers surpassed that of all other institutions or private businesses. The majority of the accusations were actually made against the Board of Examiners, which controlled the licensing of teachers, but the Board of Education's policies remained unclear, and GAA's requests for clarification or meetings went unmet. So GAA zapped the Board of Education at its headquarters in downtown Brooklyn, finding a very heavy police presence there. They continued on this issue with a zap at the Board of Examiners in downtown Brooklyn. And their demands at this ZAP included an end to discrimination against LGBT teachers, that the board issue such a public policy statement, that fired gay teachers be reinstated, that licenses be issued to teachers denied one due to their sexual orientation, and the resignation of the Board of Examiners chair unless she publicly repudiated her homophobic positions. 5 GA members remained to be arrested, and they became known as the Gertrude Unser 5, seen on the left. The police inspector in charge of the arrests here was amazingly Seymour Pine, who had been transferred to Brooklyn duty after his notorious raids on both the Stonewall and the Snake Pit. The Household Finance Corporation was a major mortgage lender accused of discrimination against the LGBT community by conducting investigations into the sex lives of applicants for loans and employment, and then denying credit to gay customers and refusing to hire homosexuals. GAA held ZAPs at 4 of their branch offices, a phone-in campaign asking about the firm's policies on homosexuality, and a main ZAP at the head office on Park Avenue. Since July of 1970, the Church of the Holy Apostles had been allowing Sunday services of the Church of the Beloved Disciple, self-described as, quote, a church for gay people. Father Robert M. Clement began to officiate over same-sex, what he called holy union ceremonies, which began to attract notice. And New York City's clerk, Herman Katz, became incensed and threatened legal action against GAA and the church. Though GAA took no formal position on same-sex marriage or on religion in general, it considered this blatant discrimination. So they held one of their most famous and creative ZAPs, an engagement party for 2 same-sex couples, complete with wedding cake, at the Marriage Bureau in the municipal building. Members distributed leaflets throughout the building, inviting city employees to the party, and Arthur Evans answered the phone and told callers that the Bureau was only issuing gay licenses that day and invited them to the party. During the second Gay Pride Week, activists held a series of actions at City Hall, highlighting Intro 475. GAA, accompanied by the Daughters of Bilitis, Radical Lesbians, and Mattachine Society in New York, held a candlelight march starting at 9 p.m. at the GAA Firehouse. About 500 people marched along Spring Street and then down Broadway to City Hall. A rally there featured speeches by Councilman Clingan and GAA President Jim Alves, who also read a letter of support from Congresswoman Bella Abzug. The next day, GAA held a ZAP at City Hall protesting Democratic Majority Leader Thomas J. Cute. At 1 in the afternoon, GAA members began picketing while about 10 people attempted to enter City Hall to meet with Cute to pressure him to take action on Intro 475, but they were blocked from entering the building, and police attempted to push people down the stairs while police on horseback rode into the crowd. Despite this, about 30 members remained for half an hour protesting. 9 people were arrested, who became known as the Cute Nine. This ZAP resulted in at least a promise from Cute to meet with GAA and the sponsors of Intro 475, and a letter was actually sent from Mayor Lindsay's office requesting hearings on the bill. The West Side YMCA, like many Ys nationally, had a reputation as a popular lodging and recreation option for gay men. The facility's director, however, announced in 1971 that patrons would be rejected for so-called homosexual practices, and he later admitted that their files contained some 1,000 cases over the previous 15 years. And it's quite interesting, despite the wise homophobic policy, it's interesting that their advertising seemed to be blatantly homoerotic. This Y had regular room checks, and residents were evicted if gay literature or other so-called evidence was found. The number of visitors per room was monitored, and each resident had to keep his door open if a visitor arrived after 9 p.m. They also employed informers and installed two-way mirrors in the basement bathroom. GA's ZAP here consisted of picketing, taking over the cafeteria, shoving flyers under the door of every room, and a sit-in in the lobby. Councilman Saul Sherrison, who was the chair of the General Welfare Committee, who had been assigned Intro 475 by CUTE, but GA found that this committee had not even met in over 2 years. After 2 ZAPs at his apartment building, Sherrison finally released the bill 5 days later. 3 hearings were held between October 1971 and January of 1972. Intro 475 was supported by the chair of the New York City Commission on Human Rights, Eleanor Holmes Norton, who you should recognize her name. Amazingly, 4 decades later, she's DC's congresswoman. Mayor Lindsay still refused to sufficiently and publicly back Intro 475, so GAA zapped his presidential campaign fundraiser at Radio City Music Hall. The event inside was thoroughly disrupted by GAA members who made noise by shouting and setting off air horns and alarms, handcuffing themselves to balcony railings and releasing flyers from the balconies, while hundreds of people picketed outside. The next day, 7 GA members were arrested at City Hall after posing as a Columbia University journalism class and chaining themselves to interior railings and to the mayor's desk. The following day, January 27th of 1972, Intro 475 was killed in the General Welfare Committee. Lindsay was then threatened with protests by gay rights groups nationally wherever he would appear in his campaign for the presidency. So on May 7th, 1972, the mayor announced an administrative directive to protect LGBT city employees against discrimination in hiring and promotion, and he claimed at that point to be the first public official in the United States to do so. GAA members had just returned back to New York City from a large rally in Albany to highlight the gay rights bills that were languishing in the state legislature, when they received a phone call that Intro 475 was being ridiculed at an event at the New York Hilton Hotel. This was the 50th anniversary dinner of the Inner Circle, which was a group of New York City Hall newspaper reporters who lampooned New York politicians every year. On very short notice, GAA decided to swing into action and zap the event. They entered the Hilton Grand Ballroom at about 11 p.m. during an intermission of the program and started distributing leaflets criticizing the media's coverage of the gay community. They were soon ejected, but a number of GAA men were physically assaulted by about a dozen attendees in hotel management. At least 6 city administration officials who witnessed the event later testified in print or in court that Michael J. May, seen on the left, a former professional heavyweight boxer and the president of the Uniformed Firefighters Association, had assaulted Morty Manford, who was then the head of gay people at Columbia. Police refused to arrest May or assist in identifying any of the other assailants. 7 GA members filed assault charges, but only May was finally charged, but with a harassment violation, not an indictment, and he was later acquitted by the judge. The incident and its aftermath, however, did garner some of the best media coverage of the gay rights movement, drawing attention to the issue of anti-gay violence and to attempts to pass the city's gay rights bill. One other major benefit resulted from this ZAP. Jean Manford, Morty's mother, outraged at the police, wrote a letter to the New York Post expressing her love and support for her son. 2 months later, she walked in the Christopher Street Liberation Day March, and the unexpected and overwhelming response she received led her and her husband in 1973 to form Parents of Gays, which is today PFLAG. In July of 1972, Intro 475 was defeated for the second time. Mayor Lindsay had created the Taxi and Limousine Commission in 1971 as the agency responsible for licensing and regulating taxicabs and for-hire vehicles. Despite the mayor's administrative directive to protect LGBT city employees against discrimination in hiring and promotion, the agency's commissioner required LGBT applicants to provide proof from a so-called certified psychiatrist that they were fit to drive a vehicle. In its ZAP, GA members dressed as delivery men carrying a lavender couch and managed to get past the receptionists and into the commissioner's private offices. Changing into white medical coats, they invited the commissioner to undergo a psychiatric evaluation while people picketed outside. The agency then claimed that the incident that triggered this ZAP had been a clerical mistake, and a memo was sent to employees that homosexuality would not be a criterion for denying a taxi license. Full disclosure, this is not the actual lavender couch that they carried. This is a symbolic lavender couch. After the third defeat of Intro 475 on April 27th, 1973, GAA disrupted New York's Diamond Jubilee celebration, which commemorated the consolidation of Greater New York. GAA President Bruce Vuller, seen in the bottom photo, was arrested while leading a demonstration during the afternoon ceremonies, and trans activist Sylvia Rivera, seen in the upper right, along with Marsha P. Johnson. Sylvia was arrested for attempting to climb a wall of City Hall. 10 others were arrested inside City Hall. Intro 475 was defeated a fourth time in committee on December 19th, 1973. It was reintroduced into the council as Intro 2 in January of 1974. On April 18th, the General Welfare Committee finally actually passed it, which allowed the bill for the very first time to go to the full New York City Council. The Catholic Archdiocese of New York, along with the Uniformed Fire Officers Association, however, mounted a vigorous and influential campaign against the bill. In response, GAA took several actions in support of Intro 2, the first of which was a very large demonstration of over 1,000 people at Christopher Park. One of the speakers, as you can see on the right, was Congressman Ed Koch. Another action was the Gay Rights Freedom Bus tour of Manhattan, Brooklyn, the Bronx, and Queens. And I haven't found a lot of information about this other than the photograph and mention, but it appears that it mainly was creating publicity about Intro 2 and gathering signatures on petitions. The full council killed the bill on May 23rd. It was reintroduced in the council as Intro 554 in June of 1974. GAA held another rally at City Hall in support of the bill the following year on May 5th, 1975, which was the last action that I could find in this regard in GAA's files. What became known as the Gay Rights Bill was introduced in the City Council every subsequent year, but was not actually passed until March 20th of 1986. GAA continued in a reduced form until 1981 when the group was formally dissolved. Despite the fact that its pioneering activism on behalf of a gay rights bill did not produce immediate results, GAA significantly helped to define and highlight many of the issues confronting the LGBT community in the 1970s, particularly discrimination and police harassment, and provided a new model of political activism. Two direct results of its pioneering activism were the formation of the National Gay Task Force in 1973 by a number of GAA leaders, which took LGBT politics to a national level, and groups like ACTA, which was formed in 1987, which held many media-savvy events in the GAA mold. So that is the end of my talk. And as Ken said to those of you who are on early, we still have some t-shirts for sale. Ken and I are both wearing them. And Ken can give the t-shirt plug.
I'm muting myself. Sure, we can give the t-shirt plug. And please visit our website. As I said, it has a lot of information on it related to these actions. And I think what we want to convey here is that we are historic preservationists who use the built environment, buildings, locations, extant sites to really convey this history. So we find it's really important to connect these actions with the sites that you were seeing on the screen, not just hearing about them, but knowing sort of the geography and the landscape of what and where took place, and how these people were so sort of savvy in calling attention to this. Jay, there were two questions. The first was, do you know who alerted GAA to the inner circle lampooning of 475? The questioner is asking the idea of a closet gay mole getting up from the banquet table and dashing to the phone booth. And the other question, which I think we can answer, as could some people, including Ann Northrup, who I see here, do we know where the term ZAP came from, and is the term still used today? And I'll answer the second question. Yes, it's definitely still used today. But Jay, maybe I'll defer to you on the first two questions.
I don't remember seeing any names of who was inside the Hilton, but clearly, as we all know, we're everywhere. So somebody was on the alert. I didn't mention in the snake pit, it was a similar thing. There were some of the arrested guys found that there were phones in the police station that were not being manned. So they actually called up GAA and GLF members, which is how that the snake pit protest was able to round up so quickly. But I don't know that I've ever seen names associated with the inner circle one. And I don't know that I've seen who first started using the word ZAP, but since Marty Robinson generally gets credited with being the inspiration behind most of the actions, I believe I just saw Phil Rea join midway in the talk, who was one of the founders. Welcome, Phil, if you're on. I'm going to stop sharing the screen so we can start seeing everybody in the audience, I guess.
Right, and if you don't want to be seen, we understand, but if you do, given that we're all been so isolated for so many months, if you want to show your face, it sort of creates a nicer interaction. Sorry. Jay, I know the term ZAP is still used today. ACT UP still meets, ACT UP still has actions, and correct me if I'm wrong, anyone, but they are still referred to as ZAPS. So it is still an active use of street theater and calling attention to issues. There's another question that came up. Is there any mention of Dr. Howard Brown and his book, Hidden Faces, Hidden Lives? So I'm not sure, Jay, if you know that information or if anyone else who's on the presentation And then just to reiterate, there was a question, the New York City Gay Rights Bill didn't pass until 1986, correct? Yes, that is correct. It took until 1986. Right, and someone's just mentioning about GAA, ACT UP followed in its footsteps, and GAG, Gays Against Guns, followed in ACT UP's footsteps, is what someone's reiterating here. Are there any people want to comment and be unmuted to discuss this? Because it's sort of, we can do that as well if that, yes, Anne, I see you raising your hand. Are you unmuted? Let's.
Okay. And apologies, I fell off for a minute, so I don't know if I missed anything, but just, we all operate on the shoulders of our predecessors. So all of this certainly built on the anti-war movement, the civil rights movement, the women's movement, all of which did some version of these actions too. And just a footnote, certainly the time I've spent under arrest in the tombs, just a night at a time, there was always a pay phone on the wall just outside the bars of the communal cells. So we were free to make phone calls all the time, as long as we had quarters with us, I guess.
Thanks, Anne. There's a someone, Shep is raising his hand, but I don't know what the question is. So, and there's another question. Do we plan to do a program later on the demonstrations and sit-ins at City Hall, which led to the passage of the Gay Rights Bill? I suppose, yes, we are.
Ken, I think that's a perfect project for you.
Thank you.
Phil, would you like to say something? Phil Rea. Could you unmute Philip R?
Yeah. Yeah, Phil, you're unmuted right now.
And
Very
he
good.
is,
No, I was just saying, it was, you know, what Anne said, I strongly agree with. It was a, you know, and with the whole Stonewall reaction, it was really part of the times. And within the following days, you had people from who were active, whether it was in the peace movement, whether it was civil rights, who came in to embrace and educate people in terms of, you know, the way to gain attention, the way to act out there, the way to make change. So it was, you know, you also had the riots going on in NYU during that period. So it was just a couple of years of very high energy and a demand for change.
I just want to interrupt for 1 second for the entire audience. This is Phil Rea. I've just gotten to know him on the phone in the last 2 weeks. He's one of the original founders of GAA, and he was one of the Rockefeller Five.
Yeah, I just, I put the book I was talking about, when I was talking to Jay, I mentioned Arthur Bell's book, you know, Dancing the Gay Blues. And, you know, it really chronicles the first year of GAA. If I'm not mistaken, in answer to your question on ZAPS, that was really something that came from Marty. Marty was an incredible person, high energy. Of the leaders of the organization, I would say he was the most humanitarian, both he and Tom Durer.
Great, thank you so much for coming. It's wonderful to finally see you.
Yes, and you as well.
So Phil, how did you, how did you learn about GAA? Where were you, what prompted your involvement?
What prompted the involvement was really, I had been to a couple of the GLF events. I was going into the field of theater, and I ended up going into a process which really came out of the West Coast. It was a combination of Salon and Gestalt therapy.
Mhm.
And there were certain practitioners in New York. And at the time, I got heavily engaged in that. And really that sort of introduced me to the village. And I had recently finally embraced myself as being a gay male. There's I don't know if you guys have spoken to her. I believe you have, Judy Bowen.
I know that.
Judy was going through a transition at the time. And she was really one of the first people I had a very strong relationship with. And she was encouraging me to basically get involved. And coming through the Salon kind of schooling, I suddenly felt empowered and that I could, make a change, that I could do difference. And as I said, there was, I was very much an activist in all forms, and decided that at the time, GAA was the right way to go because their focus was going to be strictly on gay rights. And not get confused. We could all independently, if we wanted to be part of a peace march or part of by all means, but the main focus of GAA was on gay rights.
Mhm.
However, in my own experience there, I found the hypocrisy in terms of rejection of transvestites and transsexuals. It was sort of, march at the back of the parade. And that was one of the reasons I finally left GAA.
Thank you. Just one comment is that Ann Northrup recommends Phil Zwicker's Rights and Reactions documentary about the passage of the bill in 1986. So thank you, Anne. And then I think Shep has been raising his hand. So if we can unmute Shep.
Yeah, no big deal.
I don't know if I should unmute Shep, but I'll say that nicely.
Yeah, well, you owe me a dinner. You owe me a dinner date. But I was gonna. Oh yeah, during all this time of GAA's activism, what was GLF doing? And where's the real lavender couch? 2 questions. So where was GLF?
Jay, I'll let you defer to you.
And the couch.
Well, if anybody is in here that participated in GLF, they can answer it, but it's, as Phil was indicating, their focus was so broad. They were participating in other groups with the Black Panthers, anti-war, and so on. They also, as you'll see on our website, they, with STAR, Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries, started a gay community center on 3rd Street in the former Tony Pastor's building. So they were involved in that, which only lasted for a year. As I mentioned in several of these ZAPs and on our website, they were still active and they joined in a lot of the big demonstrations that GAA had. So, but it's hard to pinpoint a lot of distinct and discrete actions and successes that they had compared to GAA.
Are there any other questions or comments, or if anyone wants to add something?
No, I agree with Jay in terms of, GLF was, became a place to socialize, a place to exchange ideas, and to get people to think about outside of the box and different ways of orchestrating them. But in terms of real action, I think GAA took the lead on that. Even the snake pit incident, which is often attributed to GLF. No, that was really GAA who organized that event.
Thanks. Susan Roberts is raising her hand.
Hi. I'm really Marcia Stone. I'm on my wife's computer. I was at one of the demonstrations at City Hall, and I don't remember the year. It was to hope that they would pass Intro 475, and they didn't. And I was the one that mentioned Dr. Howard Brown's book, because we found out that the bill didn't even come up on the floor, and the cops came to quiet us down. And one of the plainclothes cops was dating one of the guys that I was with, one of his friends. And he started screaming, "He's gay, he's gay." And it was a whole thing. And Dr. Howard Brown was, I think, the head of the Health and Hospitals Commission in the Lindsay administration. So he wrote this book later and described that incident. And what I remember about it was I was with Marcia and Sylvia. We got into the approach to the Brooklyn Bridge to block traffic. And of course, I was playing hooky from high school, so I allowed my friend Richard to drag me away so we wouldn't get arrested. But we went back to the firehouse after that and saw ourselves on TV, and that was like the highlight of our lives at that point. I have fond memories of GAA in the firehouse and just being around people like me and being able to breathe for the first time in life. So just wanted to share that.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. That's quite a statement, being able to breathe for the first time. It really gives one pause about what it felt like to have that opportunity. That's really moving. There's a question, Phil, someone's asked, did you ever meet Jackie Ramona at GAA? I'm not sure if Phil.
He's muted.
Yeah. I'm gonna try to unmute, yeah. Christiana, could you?
Hi. Jackie Ramona doesn't ring a bell.
Ramona, it was someone who is in one of the photographs of at Stonewall that is in the sort of iconic photo of people grouped outside.
Is that a real photo?
Oh yes, definitely. That's taken.
Okay.
I mean,
I recently ran across a thing that said this was a posed photo that happened 2 weeks after the event.
No, it was the second, the sort of iconic Fred McDowell photo that is often seen. It took place on the second night, on the Saturday night of the uprising. But that is in fact very real. I mean,
excellent.
Look at the contact sheet and see sort of the sequence.
No, I mean with
oh yeah,
the internet and Google, and you know, it's become so.
Sure. To your point though, so many documentaries and articles and reporters use images that they say are from Stonewall, or they use them as background filler, B-roll, that have nothing to do with Stonewall. So they're showing street fights and fires and garbage cans on fire. And myself and some other people have repeatedly contacted media to please stop using those or don't use them in documentaries. I'm just conscious of everybody's time. It's 7:27. If there's no other questions or if someone doesn't want to make a comment, I think we can sort of wrap it up and sort of commemorate LGBT History Month at this really pivotal time. So I think that I'll leave it at that and thank Jay and thank you all for participating.